In this video, I want to simplify this complex sketch by breaking it up into several smaller sketches, and then we'll create the geometry. So I see the basic shape here is a diameter of 175 and a height of 35 millimeters. So I'm going to start with that. So I'll start a new sketch on the XZ plane, and I'm going to go ahead and hide this the planes now. I know where the origin is at. And I'll draw a 2-point rectangle at the origin. I'll come over here like that, and I'll go ahead and dimension this. So I'm going to dimension from this line to this line, and I'll do that. The height of 35. And then I want to change this line to a center line. So I'll right click and change that to a center line. And I'm going to right click on this line and change this to a construction line, or you can hit X on the keyboard to convert that to a construction line. Because I've done this as a diameter now, or a center line, when I go and put the dimension in, it puts it in as a diametral dimension. So let's do that as the 175. And we see everything turns black. It's all fully constrained. Maybe I should move this image down a little bit so that we can see all of our dimensions. So let me edit that canvas, and I'll just move that image down a little bit. Okay, we'll say okay to that. All right, and then the next thing I want to do is I want to put a line in here that is a diameter of 65 over, and so I'm going to put a line. Now be careful, don't snap to the midpoint of this line unless that's where you intend for it to be. I'm going to put it over here, and I'll come up. Let's dimension that line. The height is 10, so I'll dimension from this line to this point, and I'll put in that height is 10. And then the diametral dimension from the center line over to this point, that diametral dimension is 65. Everything turns black. It's all fully constrained. So as we're going, we create one rectangle or one line or one circle, and we dimension immediately and keep following that procedure so that all of our sketch is fully defined as we go. I'm going to hit the X on the keyboard, change that line to a construction line. And then I want to put this arc in, and I want to put this arc in. So I'm going to create a 3-point arc, and I'll click, and again, be careful, don't click on the midpoint here unless that's where you intended for it to be. I'll click somewhere other than the midpoint, and I'll click here, and I'll just click a 3rd point here, and we'll go in and put in the radius here in a minute. I'll do the same thing over here. I'll click over here, and I'll put, now if I want that tangent, I'll click where it puts that tangent in. If I don't want it tangent, then don't click where it would put that tangent constraint in, or you could delete the tangent constraint. All right, and then I'm going to dimension this distance. So I'll dimension the distance from here up to here, and that distance is 20. And then if I want this point, the center of this arc on that line, and I'll do a coincident constraint of this point on that line. And so I don't even need a radius dimension with these constraints and dimensions. Now, if you don't want these tangents, then you have to put the dimensions in there. And so I've completed that part of the sketch. And then I'm going to mirror this line over to the other side. And so I'll do mirror, and I'll select this line, and it already finds the center line. So I'll say okay to that. So I mirrored that center line over to the other side. I'm then going to draw this rectangle right here, but I'm going to put it over on this side. And so I'll do a rectangle, 2-point rectangle. I will dimension it or sketch it about like that. And then I'll put in the height of 23. So I'll dimension from the origin up to here, and I want to get that height in here of 23. And I like to put this over on this side, and then I'm going to put the diametral dimension from here over to the center line of 120. So I'll dimension from this point to the center line, and we'll do that as 120. Okay, and then I have one more dimension. I see this is still blue, so when something is still blue, drag it. It's obvious then I need to put the width on that. So I'll dimension the width of this, and I might put it down here, or I might put it up here. I'm going to put it up here. And actually I got that as an angle line, so let me try that again. I'll select those lines. Instead of this point and this point, I'll select this line, and I'll do that as 1.5. Okay, so I'm going to just leave these elements in the sketch, and then we'll put some of the other sketch geometry into a new sketch to keep these sketches a little bit more simple than my complex sketch. All right, so let me finish sketch, and I'll save it, and then we'll continue on. For my next sketch, I'm going to do these two rectangles, and I'm going to bring the height of this. This is for a counterbore hole. I'm going to bring it up to this height. So I'll start a new sketch on the XZ plane, and I'm going to do P for project and select this line right here to project it into my new sketch. I'll say OK to that. And then I think I'll project, well, I may not need that center line. If I need it, I'll project it. But I'm going to hide sketch number 1. And I prefer to change this projected line to construction. It really doesn't matter, but I'm going to select that and hit X to change that to a construction line. And then I'm going to do a rectangle, and I'm going to select that rectangle about like that. And then I'm going to do this a little bit different than I'm going to flip this to the other side. It's going to be revolved, so it doesn't matter, but I want it 55 over. Now you can change the dimension later on if you need to. I'm going to dimension from this line over to here, and I'll do that as 55. And actually, I think I'm going to undo that, and we'll do this a slightly different way. So that's going to be this point from here to here. So let's draw this second rectangle here. So I'm going to draw another rectangle, and I'll put that rectangle right here, about like that. And then I want this line and this line to be center line. So I'll right click, I'll change those to a center line. I'll change this one to a center line. And then I'm going to put this line coincident with the origin. So I'll do coincident. I'll select the origin. I'll select that line. It moves it now. It turns black. It's coincident with the origin. I'll dimension the distance from this point, not the center line, from this point over to here. I don't want a diametral dimension about that center line there. And I think that was 55. Let me see. And of course, you can always change these dimensions later on if you need to. And then for this diameter is 6, and this diameter is 15.5. So I want this as a diametral dimension, so I'll pick the center line and select that line or that point, and I'll do that as 6. And I'll do the center line. I could pick either here or here, it doesn't matter. The center line to this point as 15.5. And so we've got those two dimensions. And I see that this line is still blue. It could still translate vertically. And so I want to put this height here. I'll dimension from this point to that point as 1.5. Now you might make this 1.5 that we put in there a couple of times. Now we're going to do a couple more times. That's actually going to be our shell thickness for the material. So it'll probably be a good idea to make a variable, a named parameter for that. And so that we just change it one place. If we need to change that shell thickness, it'll change it everywhere. All right, so this one's fully defined, and I'll finish that sketch, and then we'll create one more sketch. So we've kept this sketch pretty simple. I'm going to go back to sketch 1 and turn off sketch 2. We kept this sketch pretty simple. I'm going to project geometry from this sketch, and we'll make one more sketch. So I'll do a new sketch on the XZ plane, and I'll P for project geometry. I'm going to project this arc, and I'm trying to decide whether I need this arc. I don't really think I need that arc. I'm going to go ahead and project this line. I'm not really sure if I need it yet, but we can always go back and project things again if we need to. And I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. Now I'm going to turn off the visibility of sketch 1, and I'm going to mirror these to the other side. Maybe I want that center line there, so I'll go back to sketch 1 and I'll do P for project on that. And I'm going to project this line as well, so I'll say OK to that, and then I'll turn off sketch number 1. So I'm going to change this one to a center line, so I'll right click, change that to a center line. I'm going to change these two to construction. And we don't really need to do that. I just like to do that so that a year from now I can figure out, why I did certain things the way I did. Now I'm going to mirror this arc and this line about the center line. We see that it automatically selects that center line. And then I'm going to draw a 3-point rectangle over here. Now, for a minute, this will be confusing, but then we'll make it make sense. And so I'm going to go in and I'm going to do a 3-point rectangle, and I'm going to select, and I'm trying to decide how I want to do this. I'm going to do it along this line here. So I'll do it along this line here, and we'll come down like that with that rectangle. I'm going to move this point up a little bit. I don't want to snap to that, or at least not yet. Maybe I do want to snap to that, but I'm going to make a change here. And so I want this line to be a center line. So I'm going to right click on that, and I'm going to change that to a center line. And then I want this corner to be 1.5. Actually, I'll need to make some changes here as we're going along. And I need to put in an angle here of 30 degrees or 32 degrees and 19. And so before I can do that, I need to remove the parallel constraints because I want that as an angle. So I'll delete the parallel constraints between those two lines. Okay, and now if I drag this, well, I'll put the angle in and we'll see what happens here. So I want this as 19 degrees. Let's just draw a construction line in here, construction line over here. And we mirrored this line, so we can just draw it over to that point. And I will change this to a construction line, X on the keyboard. And then I need to put in that 19. And actually, this line is going the wrong way entirely. And I might have some trouble getting the angle that I want. I actually drew the rectangle in here, perhaps not the way I want. Let's try putting in this 32. So I'll dimension between here and here, and let's try doing that as 32. And then I want to put this line right here perpendicular to that line. So I'll do perpendicular, and I should have done that before the 32 dimension. And it doesn't want me to do that. We'll have to take out this perpendicular that was in there, and now we should be able to do that. So I do perpendicular between here and here. Okay, so now we're closer to where we want. I want to bring this 32 dimension in here where we can see it, and then I need 19 between the horizontal and this line. So I'll dimension between the horizontal and this line. I'll do that as 19. Okay. And then I'm going to, I want the intersection between this point and this is the origin. I have a construction line there now. It's different than this construction line. I want this point up here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that point first. And so I can just drag and drop it onto that point. And then I'm going to, where this point crosses, I want that to be 1.5 from there to there. So I need a point. So I'll do a sketch point at that location, and then I'll dimension that 1.5. And again, we might create a parameter with this so that if we change it one place, it changes it everywhere, that 1.5. We see that this all turns black, and then we need to get it constrained over on this side. And let me think about that, how I want to do that. If I want this line, and it looks like it is staying perpendicular to the center line, but let's just go ahead and do a perpendicular and see what it does. I'll do actually, because it's parallel to this line, we don't need to put in that perpendicular. So I need to decide how I'm going to constrain this point so that everything, and I see that this point right here is on that arc, and so I'll do coincident. I'll do this point onto the arc, and we see that this sketch all turns black. So it's all fully defined on this side. Now I'm going to do a similar thing over on this side. Hey, just like we started with the 3-point rectangle over here, I'll start with a 3-point rectangle over here. So I'll create a rectangle. I'll do a 3-point rectangle. I want the first point to be on this arc. So I'll click somewhere on this arc, but be careful you don't click on the midpoint of that arc. Somewhere on that arc, and I'll come up here and I'll click like that to put that in. Then I want this angle to be 7 degrees. So I'll dimension between the horizontal and this line as 7 degrees. Okay? And then I want the distance from this intersection up to here to be 1.5. And so I'll put a sketch point here. So I'll do a point at this intersection right here. I'll put in the dimension between here and here of 1.5. And then I want to put a diameter symbol between here and here, but I don't want this line to be parallel to this line. And so I'm going to delete that parallel constraint, and let me get out of the dimension command. All right, I'll delete this parallel constraint, and I'll change this to a center line, and I'm going to try to drag this point down, and I'm going to then put a dimension. Now I want the dimension to be between this point where it's going to intersect the body and this center line, not out here. Don't put the diameter out there. So let's do the angle first between here and here, and that is 10 degrees. And then I'll do the diameter between the center line and this point over here. Again, I didn't do it to that point. I did it to this point over here where it's going to intersect the body. I'll do that as 9. And I want to make sure that this center line stays above that arc right there. And I'm going to drag this over here a little bit. And then I think I'll put this point right here coincident with this line right there so that this no longer moves. So I'll do coincident between this line and this point. It all turns black. It's all fully defined. Again, I'll check this down here. There's a short little line right here perpendicular to the center line or parallel to the line at the other end of the, and actually it's perpendicular down here to this. I want this line, it doesn't really matter, but I want it perpendicular to the center line. So let me delete that perpendicular because we're going to revolve about this. So I prefer to do the perpendicular about the axis of revolution. Okay, so now it's black again. And so then this line is parallel to this short little line over here. It's fully defined. All right, we're ready to start creating some geometry. We've created all of our sketches. I'm going to finish sketch. I'm going to hide this canvas that I brought in here. I may just delete it. I'll go back to sketch number 1, and I'm going to revolve this about the center line. So I'll do my revolve. I'll select this profile. It automatically selects the center line. I'll say OK to that. All right, I'm going to make that sketch visible again. So I'll make sketch visible, and I want to revolve this as well as a separate body. So let's turn off the visibility of the first body. I'm going to do revolve, and I'll select this profile. It picks that center line. I want it as new body, not join. I want it as new body. I'll say OK to that, and then we're going to hide that one, and we'll come back to that one later. I'll hide that sketch. I'll turn on the next sketch, and I'm not ready to use that sketch. So I probably should have created this as sketch number 3 and created this as sketch number 2, but I'll just turn that off, and I'll come to this sketch. I'm going to do a revolve, and I'm going to select this profile, and I'll select the center line as the axis. I want it to do a cut, so I'll say OK to that. Now we can change those dimensions on that profile to get whatever the shape is that we want. I'll make that sketch visible again. I'll do revolve, and I'll select this profile, and I want to rotate about the center line, and I'll say OK to that to cut that away. If we look at this from the top view, so we have this shape and we have this shape, and then we'll do a pattern of those. But before we do the pattern, let's go ahead and put a fillet on this edge and this edge. So I'll do a fillet. I'm going to put a fillet here, and I'm going to do a fillet here. And let's do that, say, as a radius of 1 millimeter. And I'll just try a radius and see how it looks. And now that looks good to me. And I think I also want to add this arc right here to my fillet. And so I'm trying to decide whether I want to do that now or I want to do it later. Let's go ahead and add that arc. So I'm going to edit that last feature. I'll say edit feature, and I'll hold down the control key and I'll select this arc so that it puts a fillet on there as well. When I went to make those 5 copies, I decided I don't want that fillet right there. So I'm going to edit that feature, and I will control unselect that arc, and then I'll do my circular pattern. So I'll do my pattern, I'll do circular, make sure that it's on features. I will select the fillet feature and the last 2 revolves, and then I'll select the axis, the z-axis, and tell it that I want to do 5 copies. And I hit the wrong number. Let's do that as 5. Okay. And I could put it as optimized or identical. I'm going to leave it on optimized. I might make a change to that. And here's the reason I took that fillet off of here, because if I did, when I go to fillet this, I would have to go around and select each one of these edges, where now I'll only have to select one edge. We'll see that in a few minutes. Okay, then I'm going to turn on the visibility of sketch number 2. And before I do the cut, I think I'll do a fillet in here. Now, I didn't do that fillet as part of this fillet because we're not going to do 5 copies of that. We only need a single copy of that fillet, or a single fillet. And so I'll put in the 1 or whatever radius for that fillet. And then I'm going to revolve, cut this feature right here. So I'll do revolve, and I'll select that feature, and I'll select the axis, and we'll say OK to that. Now, I didn't cut the lower portion of that, so that hole doesn't go all the way through because I want that to shell. And now it is time to do our shell. So I'll select shell, I'll select this side face. I want to remove that side face, and I also want to remove the bottom of the part, and I'll put our shell thickness as 1.5, and we'll say OK to that. Okay, so we see the part is now shelled, and now I can put that hole that goes all the way through. And so I'll turn the visibility of sketch 2 back on, and let's rotate around where we can see that. And so this rectangle down here is for the hole, and so we'll do revolve. And if I have trouble selecting that rectangle, just hold the mouse button down, and now it can cycle through. I want to get that profile. And then for the axis, I want to get this center line, and I'll say OK to that to put the hole through the part. I'll hide that sketch, and we'll go on to the next step. All right, then want to put a fillet along this outside edge. So I'll do fillet, and I'm going to select this. And so now, because of the order in which I did it, it's going to go all the way around in one selection. I don't have to do multiple selections. I'm going to do this one as 0.5 or whatever radius you think is appropriate. Let's change that to 1 and see what it looks like. But, you know, whatever is appropriate. I'm going to put that back to 0.5. All right, and I'll say OK to that. I'm going to do modify, and I'll do compute all. And so it's going through and computing the model, and it tells me, it gives me a problem. It says edge missing for a fillet, and I see that it's red over here. There's a little red mark over here where it seems like it's lost the edge. But when I say OK or close this, the fillet is still there. So I don't know why it would give me that yellow warning. There was a problem with the lost edge when it didn't give it to me in the original creation of the fillet, and it still creates it even though it shows me a warning. So that's a simple method of creating what looks to be some fairly complex geometry. I almost forgot about the support ring that we have going underneath this thing. And so let's turn on that second body. We see this ring, and I'm trying to decide whether I want to subtract it before or after fillets. So let's drag this back away to right after the shell. Well, actually, the shell didn't occur very long ago. So I'm just looking at what I put in there after the shell, whether I could simplify that any. And it doesn't look like it makes it any more simple to do this at an earlier date. Actually, let me look at it some more. I may do it before this hole. No, it's we want to do it now. All right, now I brought this up extra high, and we'll see why here in a second. So I'm going to do a combine, and as for the target body, I'm going to select this, and then as for the tool bodies, I'm going to select this as a tool body, and I want to do cut, but I want to keep the tool body. So I'll say okay to that, and I'll say okay, now the reason I did this up here higher is so I can select that entire body with one click. If I did it below, then I'd have to click, I'd have a whole bunch of little pieces like I do down on this side. So I have each one of these little pieces on the bottom. I don't want the same thing on the top. I only want one on the top. And so now I can just remove that one body. So I need to find which one it is. And I'll come over here and I'll right click and I'll say remove, not delete. I'll remove that body. And so now I still have those ribs underneath. I need to combine everything together. And so I'll do another combine and I'll select this body and I'll come over here and select this body. Hold down the shift key. I'll select the last body so that gets all of them. I'm going to join those together. I'll say okay to that. And I'm not sure why it didn't join. Let me try that again. I'll edit that feature. And I had it on join. What did I do wrong here that it didn't join? It should have joined all that together. I did this before and it worked fine. Here's what it was. So I forgot to turn off that keep tools, so it kept the original and joined it together. I need to uncheck keep tools, okay? And so now they're just one solid body. So we'll say that I made the various mistakes in here on purpose as a learning tool. Yeah, we'll go with that.